Hi, this is Stephanie. Thank you for joining us today. A few quick notes before we get started on our Service Taxonomy webinar today. You are muted, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel. You can access the Q&A panel from the blue icon with the question mark along the top WebEx Event Center menu. Please send your questions to all panelists. That way I can field the questions and assign them to the different speakers. Also, to go to full screen mode, you will find this helpful later, especially during Jeff's demo. You'll see double arrows above the right-hand corner of the presentation slide that you see right now, right above the green box to the right. If you use those double arrows or the plus sign, that will bring you to full screen mode. And like I said, they'll be helpful during the demo. Lastly, we are recording this event today, so you will receive an email from me with a link to the recording as well as a link to the slides, and I will get that out to you no later than Monday. So without any further delay, I'd like to turn it over to Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen Systems. Don?
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Don Casson, CEO of Evergreen, and with me is my usual co-host, Jeff Benedict, who heads up our ITSM practice and leads our innovation efforts. If you're new to our webinar series, thanks for joining us. Welcome. If you're a past attendee, thanks for coming again. Our goal is to share valuable information and insights you can use in your planning and activities right now. The topic we'll explore today is, what is the Service Taxonomy and why do I need one? So here's our agenda. After a very little bit about Evergreen, we'll dive into our topic. Beyond that, we'll briefly demonstrate our visual taxonomy and our always evolving view of a very advanced service catalog and portable experience built on ServiceNow. After that, we'll have answer any questions you have if you have any. Excuse me. Evergreen is a US-based consulting firm, and we've worked with hundreds of mid-market, Fortune 1000 companies and public sector organizations to help improve their IT service management execution. We're a full lifecycle firm having both process and technology in one company. We're one of the top 5, probably one of the top 3 U.S. service partners now, and have over a decade of domain experience in each of their areas of their portfolio. But we view all of this from a perspective of customer-centric IT service management. At Evergreen, we think that traditional ITSM thinking is wrong because it puts the customer last. Hard to believe, but true. And you could wonder, how could that possibly happen? You know, there's a couple of reasons for it. First, we all have walls around our thinking we don't even see. This is how it's always been done, so we don't think to challenge it. Second, we don't know how to put the customer first. What are the best practices? So we put them in phase 3. Third, we do know traditional ITSM really well, so we do what we're comfortable with. Unfortunately, it's not the right answer. We need to start with the customer. If we do, it will change what we actually do. An incident, rather than thinking about how to handle incidents, we'll focus instead on eliminating or preventing the customer, eliminating incidents or preventing the customer from having to contact us in the first place. In change management, rather than always thinking about managing change, instead we'll think first about how to eliminate or streamline or automate changes. Knowledge can become search and learn, a much more powerful enabling experience than sort of a tired afterthought it is often today. So if you start with the customer, it can change what you do. As we often do, starting with some idle definitions can help. In this, you're going to see something. You'll notice black and green text. The green text is where we extended the definition to provide needed clarity. Services are consumable, durable in nature, and they're provided on an ongoing basis. Services carry expectations around availability, hours of service, support, and remediation. And they're also managed as configuration items in the CMS, stored in the CMDB. Services are under change control. Requests, on the other hand, are transactional. Once complete, they're done, versus services that are ongoing. As an example, providing Oracle database to a customer is a service. Asking for access to the Oracle database is a request. There's no idle definition for a service taxonomy, so we had to borrow one. According to dictionary.com, the taxonomy is the science or technique of classification. So for us, a service taxonomy is a science or technique of classifying services. You can see, not hard to see, how the layering of services and customers could quickly give rise to a large number of services and combinations. As providers, you can also see how easy it would be to get lost in the volume. This taxonomy, a service taxonomy, is a logical, repeatable way to classify the services we offer, as well as the ones we might want to offer. The taxonomy of Homo sapiens here is actually a pretty good type of model for IT services. The classification goes from very broad to very specific, from millions to few. The 140-year-old Dewey Decimal System is another really good taxonomy example, and is still used today at over 200,000 libraries worldwide. Most taxonomies organize things in logical categories, groups, and even subgroups as the classification gets more specific. They don't have to be hierarchical groups. They can be alphabetical listings of things as well. The best type of taxonomy for you is the type that is most useful in creating and managing the services you want to offer. So what are the benefits of this approach? Here are 5 pretty good ones. Since we'll have a number of constituents, customers and providers, with interest in building and maintaining our taxonomy, having a commonly understood way to group and classify items helps in the consistent definition and categorization of services. This consistency also brings clarity amongst the constituents as a strong general group understanding of the use of the framework develops. Being able to see and handle the framework easily from high to low helps to shine a light on redundant or unnecessary services, thereby simplifying the service catalog as well, as ensuring that individual services are built in the most simple and reusable way. A well-understood classification system makes it much easier to align services in logical groups, helping to eliminate cultural and organizational biases as to where services go. A clear, consistently used framework with services makes it easy to identify services or sub-services that can be combined to create new services, driving up beneficial reuse. So there's 5 pretty good reasons for this. This is a broad service taxonomy example, and at the highest level of this framework, it should capture the broadest view of what you see as within the scope of your effort. Of course, it can be grown or shrunk later. It's never really locked down, but it's easier to start with a broad view. There's no downside to it. You don't have to use all of it right away, and it could make it easier later in not having to reclassify efforts or reclassify activities downstream that could come from changing the taxonomy. The parts of the taxonomy are meant to be parts of a whole. Here's if you look at this particular example, we've got 4 different areas. We've got line of business services, we've got shared services, and 2 different types of IT services categories. We break IT services into 2 groups, customer-facing and internal IT. You don't have to follow this convention, but these are often mixed together, which can confuse everyone. Here you'll also see sort of one of our taxonomy principles at work. The taxonomy labels are for the customer, and the framework is for the providers. A service can be presented to a customer many different ways. It may be in a what's new kind of flashing icon, or a list of people who like this also like this kind of service. It isn't just found by drilling down in a taxonomy. But any section of a taxonomy is targeted at a particular customer set. And since we want to think like the customer, then the labels in that section should be in the customer's language, not the provider's. If you look at the 2 categories above, you can see the difference in the labels for the 2 groups, as well as the categories. What do we mean when we say the framework is for the providers? It's the way the providers can understand the breadth and the depth of the services and combinations of services offered. If you have 300 services, could you really understand a numbered or alphabetical list of them? It would be too hard. So the framework is for the providers to help understand the services and combinations, to avoid creating redundant services, to better combine existing ones, and to ensure that the services are aligned with the right customer. Another evergreen principle is we all have services and we all have customers. And that's true for pretty much everyone in IT and beyond IT as well. So here's a view of that principle or that conversation from a visual service taxonomy perspective. At the top, IT is providing an infrastructure or internal IT service from the category business continuity. It's an application, SAP. The customer for the service that continuity service is the IT employee who owns the application SAP. That IT employee provides the service, in this case we'll call it SAP application, that may not be the name, but for the moment that'll be fine, to his or her customer in the finance department, in this case at a college. The college finance department, at the very bottom, provides the service collect amounts owed or pay your tuition online here to their reluctant customer, the college student. A taxonomy, and this is a picture that shows the breakdown as you go down the taxonomy and the labels that we're using. A taxonomy can have as many levels as makes sense in any given section of the framework. One area may only have 2 levels of classification, while another may require 5. It doesn't really matter. The guiding principle is customer-centric. What is the way the customer would expect to see it? As a general rule of thumb, if any area has more than 7 or 8 items in it, it makes sense to further refine with another level, as the number of choices becomes too broad to easily see and understand. Remember, the taxonomy is only a framework for organizing and ends where services begin. To help better see the distinctions, we have color-coded the taxonomy purple, the services orange, and the requests green. So here's an actual example. Let's assume we have 6 or 7 different flavors of Oracle service. Windows, Linux, HP, UX, Solaris, whatever. As you can see, Oracle, the term Oracle is a service family. This is because Oracle alone is not a service. It's not consumable. Oracle for Windows is a service. It is consumable. We also, in this particular example, have 3 different service offerings for Oracle for Windows: Silver, Gold, and Platinum. Last, at the far bottom right, you see requests, where actions, these are actions, often some form, usually of add, change, or remove. We previously did a webinar with 4 specific steps to building a taxonomy, which you can access from our website if you like. And if you can't find it, send us an email and we'll point you to it. So to change it up a bit, instead, I decided I'd like to highlight some key tips for success in a taxonomy. The first one is to start with a common understanding. I know many of you have had idle training. I bet you find it much easier to discuss ITSM principles with coworkers who have also been through idle training. The same thing is true for moving from a technical, inwardly focused kind of IT organization to a services-based, customer-centric organization. Building a common understanding of key terms with your team is really essential for success. Creating a single broad taxonomy early on is very critical. As mentioned, at the highest level, the framework should capture your broadest view. It's completely fine to create multiple different service catalogs effectively inside a single broad taxonomy. For example, the category HR would have a service catalog with services that are logically seen as HR services in the eyes of the customer. The same would be true for customer-facing IT services. Here's some good general framework best practices to follow. Try to target 8 or less selections per category, which I mentioned, and try to limit the number of hops from the highest level category down to the service to somewhere in the 3 to 5 range. These two trade off each other, as the schema is really a balancing exercise in breadth and depth. Going broader at the end, at the very end where the services or the requests are, is not all bad. You might even have 10 or 15 items there sort of violating that rule in services under a subgroup. Because you are drilling down to the customer's real focused interest level, they'll be okay with more options at that point. Then work to simplify, use as few words as possible, and then define the services in the customer's terms. We use a visual mapping technology called XMind. It's powerful, easy to use, and inexpensive. A visual approach allows you to work effectively as a group to better understand the range and types of services offered, even as services reach into the hundreds. It helps you see where a new service type in one area might also be valuable in another area. It makes it easier to prevent duplication of services you already have, drives up reuse of existing services, and enables you to see where combining existing services can more easily create a new service, rather than designing each new service individually from the start to the finish. It is important to apply a building block mentality to constructing services, then combine the blocks to create new services and variations of existing ones. If all your services are single-threaded, custom-built, they'll be expensive, impossible to maintain, and confusing your customer. If you think about Amazon, what would it be like if every Amazon department had its own checkout procedure? But this idea has its challenges too. Any service module, let's say we've got one, for example, called financial approval process. It could be used in hundreds of services. So service configuration management is mandatory, with each service being managed as a CI mapped into any combined services of which it is a part. I know the CMDB has a reputation as a solution in search of a problem. This is a great use for it. It's important to look past that reputation and use the CMDB and CIs for managing your services, or you can quickly get lost. So now we come to a couple of pitfalls we want to avoid. It is true that oftentimes big pitfalls are frequently the ones we create ourselves out of our inherent IT nature. We often don't even see them. IT navel-gazing is looking IT out rather than customer in. You can't design services customers want and need if you don't talk to them. Start and sustain a dialogue with key customers as you go down the services path. Make it a part of your process. Bake it into your process you follow for success. The next one is don't go all Wild West on it. In IT, if some is good, more is better. That's my favorite thing about IT. When we have a new exciting idea, we go gangbusters. We can build a lot of stuff fast. So we could build rifle shot services quickly with no consistency, discipline, or reuse. Then we could have a confused mess. Slow down, be premeditated, build with enterprise durability in mind. The last one is not to claim victory too early. The taxonomy is challenging because, in some ways, it's a new way of thinking with some new terminology. Even so, it's the easy part. Building the service offerings and delivering the services well in a way the customers love them, that's the hard part. Okay, so that's it for our PowerPoint or our presentation section today. Now comes the fun part. They don't let me demo much of anything around here. I do get to demo our service taxonomy solutions.
Jeff.
So let's see how I do.
You need to make Jeff
And share it. I'm not the presenter anymore.
Yes, sir.
Am I?
Yep.
Hold on a second.
This is why we don't let you demo too often.
Does Jeff not demo?
Sorry about that. Okay. That is the right application.
It is.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, it looks good.
And I'll remind everyone that if you use the double arrows in the right-hand corner, you can take this to full screen, which will help because the type is a little small, depending on if you're on the laptop.
Maybe I did that on purpose. Okay. So here you can see, this is pretty broad, like we talked about at the highest level. Over here on the left-hand side, we have non-IT services, like the line of business services. And down here we have shared services, which are those kind of common internal services you often see. And if we go over to the other side here, we see the IT services on the right. And as I said, that building this is really generally a workshop activity, and having a visual workspace really, really helps. We pre-built about 70 to 80%, as our best guess, of what you will need out of the box to do this. And this framework now has over 500 components, and it's still growing. So let's go over here and we'll look at IT. And like I said, you notice these two categories. One is for the customer-facing IT, and the other is for the IT internal services. And we're going to try to keep those separate so we don't get mixed up. So if we open this one up, let me go over here. We've got 8 categories here, which you can see.
Don, could you zoom in a bit, perhaps?
I sure can.
Bottom right-hand corner of your screen, where your magnification is.
Is that better?
That is better.
Thank you.
Maybe even close the properties tab on the right.
I'm getting a lot of instructions. Not sure how to do that, guys. I think that's it. Okay. Now are you happy?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so we've got 8 categories grouped logically, and in simple terms, based on the customer's view of the services. All right, so if we go here, let's open up the service desk. We might say, okay, here's some requests, popular requests against a number of requests against the service that get help, report a problem or an outage, get answers, and in our popular requests, we might have things like, hey, tune up my PC, that'd be pretty cool. What's new? Back me up, this sort of thing. Okay, so there's a lot of this. Now, these might not be presented to the customer in this taxonomy, like we talked. They could be in a scrolling banner, it could be in a pop-up entitled, you know, what's new and hot now, or it could even be found via search, right? So it's not necessarily how they get to it. And given that, you can see how the taxonomy helps us keep our sanity, right? So let's go down a little bit further. We're going to open up personal computing mobility. Okay, and here we're trying to cover the full spectrum from the customer's perspective, all their interaction devices. Note, we include mobile devices in this category rather than in communication and collaboration. Our experience has shown that customers think more this way of these devices than as them being communication devices. But it's up to you how you do it in your culture. So if we look at this, we're going to open this up, and we've got a couple of categories of services here in the mobile store service. We've got iOS, or iPhone services, Android phone, and mobile, and we crack that open a little further, and we might have some bundles, some service offerings, basic, medium, and advanced, and the same thing is true for the Android. But what if you've already got your phone? Then there might be some offerings around the different providers, so you could switch or what you want to do from a provider standpoint, okay? If we go down a little further, now let's open up this one, PCs and tablets, printers, and accessories. I'm going to move it down here so you can see it. So we see these are request areas, right? We've got requests. We've also got a service called virtual desktop. So you can see request and service can exist at the same level. We open up the PC, and we've got as a category, request category PC, Windows, desktop, and then we might have some bundles here we could request, basic, medium, and advanced. Let's see now, where do we want to go next? All right, let's go down here into the data center hosting and infrastructure. So you can see, we look at this, these are the kind of common things you see inside that data center compute world, and we might have a category called bundled compute solutions and Windows or Linux, and then we might have options as to physical virtual cloud, and we could again have bundles out here, low, medium, and high. That might make sense for us, right? And we might have some more sophisticated customers that just provision a server and then build on top of that themselves, so they could do it this way with Windows or Linux. Right? So now let's go down, for fun here, let's go down to database. We open it up, and we see, because we already talked a little about Oracle, we see Oracle, SQL, and NoSQL, 3 different categories, and we open Oracle up, and now we see that in the Oracle service family, there are 4 different services, Oracle for Windows, Linux, HP UX, and for Solaris, okay? And off of that, as an example, if we open up the Oracle for Windows service, we see we've got 3 different levels of service, too. These are service offerings against it, silver, gold, or platinum. Not an unusual kind of thing you can see in this kind of area. Then we open it up, and we might actually then have some requests against that service. So we could request access to that silver service. We could change our access or change our status or change something in the database, and we could remove it if we needed to. So you can kind of see how that flows out as you go out. We'll close that back down. Okay, let's now go down to the IT internal services. As we open this up, we see we've got 8 different categories here as well, with slightly different focus and naming than in the customer-facing ones. Essentially, the customers for this catalog set are IT employees or people that speak IT, right? And so if we go into application services as an example, you can see we open this up. We got categories of dev and release, host and delivery, and then app support. If we open up dev and release, well, these are the kind of services that we typically provide when we're developing software, not something that a non-IT person would really want to see or understand. So if we close that, we can go, just for fun, down into data center hosting IT services here as well. And we see we've got 5 categories: facilities, hosting, operations services, disaster recovery, continuity, and web services. So if we go into hosting, because we were up at that before, server, database, storage, and application, let's open up the database. We see we've got three different categories: provision, config and performance management, and support. And of course, you can have the categories that make sense in your business. It's not really critical. And as we open up provision, we see again there's our friend Oracle, SQL, NoSQL. And we crack open Oracle, and there are the services: Oracle for Windows, Linux, HP UX, and Solaris. So on this far end, again, we've got the variable levels of service, and we've got some request types. Now, what's interesting here is this is the IT provider's kind of view of the service they're providing, and we're provisioning, modifying, or removing service. Now, it could be consumed by someone coming in, a sophisticated customer in that IT customer facing, or just as likely, or maybe even more likely, it could be consumed by someone in IT, someone who is doing something in this area and building a more complex solution of which database is a part. And we're basically providing it as a sub-service to someone else's service. Okay, so I think that I've pretty much used most of my time there, but you can see, I think it gives you a pretty good idea of what we've got going here. If you want to get this taxonomy into your service management platform, you can export it as a CSV file, making it easier to get.
Don, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I don't usually do this during the presentation, but someone has asked, what's the taxonomy? Services, categories, offerings, requests. Seems like the presenter is using services generically. So
we're going to have to hold that till later.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure we didn't get too
far
down.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
All right, so now I'm going to stop sharing, and Jeff, you can take over.
Let me unmute myself. Thanks, Don. All right, so I'm going to start kind of where I started a lot of our presentation. I'm kind of starting in our self-service portal that we've built on our content management system of ServiceNow, and I'm going to kind of go into where we would show kind of that service taxonomy or that service listings from a kind of consumer perspective. And again, some of the purpose why we show this service, the service definitions and the service organization is, I guess, first and foremost, to provide some clarity on what are the services we provide, align on expectations with the consumer, and also kind of, I guess, provide a means to communicate in the same language with our customers. So one of the things that we see on this page is we kind of break down in this taxonomy view the different categories and the different services or subcategories that are underneath each of these. And this would, kind of come from the same data that that Don was showing in terms of that taxonomy. The classification tree will ultimately come in here in terms of our different groupings. There is a perspective for the consumer of seeing the services where they are a subscriber. And these can be, linked to the user individually, though more commonly these are inherited from the user's affiliation with their department, their company, their location, and saying these are the services that we offer, to this particular department or this particular location, and then the user can see their specific services as kind of within this particular portal. Another thing you'll notice if I go back to the taxonomy view, there is a high-level category or catalog area. So there is a support for multiple catalogs. So for example, we can divide out those categories and services that belong into our shared services HR space. Same for facilities, right? And then now we'll go back into IT. These being our IT customer-facing services and the different organization and groupings that we would apply to those services. Let's drill into one of them, show you kind of in the HR area. So under HR, just got a couple services here, one for Workday, one for PeopleSoft HRMS. We'll go look at Workday, for example. And so we finally get to the services kind of page. A lot of what we're showing here, and we call this kind of the service tombstone or service brochure. So you get summary information about what's the service, who's it available to, requirements, what's in scope, what's out of scope, any offerings, and ultimately the commitments that are in here. The health and status of our service. So if I have any outages or alerts or notable messages, I would see those on this tab. We do allow the users to provide feedback and reviews in relation to the service, as well as submit ideas. And we solicit this as part of the workflow as becoming a new subscriber. We look to get some feedback on the actual service. And you also notice up here my little sidebar, there is a kind of a slice of information that's being provided of frequently asked questions. So this is taking content from our knowledge base in ServiceNow and kind of slicing it across our different services perspectives to say, here's some of the knowledge articles that are relevant to Workday. And if I'm curious about more information about Workday, here's some of the things I might want to also look into as far as frequently asked questions. The same concept applies here as far as the requests and things that I can request from our service catalog. There's an association made between the service definition and those things that you can request in context of that particular service. So for example, I could request access to Workday, which would then go through workflow and make me a new subscriber of that particular service. One other perspective, and actually I'll start from the home page here instead of this page, but so one of the things that we're also doing in this portal, communicating to users in context of services, are service outages and any service alerts. So there is a consolidated or macro view of that kind of that status health tab that I showed a minute ago on the service. In this case, this is across all of our service taxonomy. And again, I can subdivide this by our catalogs, but across all of our service taxonomies, here are any of the service alerts and outages. Here's any of the upcoming planned maintenance activities, as well as the health of our services over the last 5 days, right? And I can obviously see that one of our services here has got some outages and has been going on for a couple of days. And this can show your degradations, your outages, as well as any planned maintenance or upcoming planned maintenance activities. All right, so shift away from the consumer perspective just for a moment. And we'll kind of look at kind of the defining the taxonomy and the services. Before I go there, I did want to highlight for those who own ServiceNow and kind of, I guess, want to know what the pieces and parts that I'm showing. There are a few plugins that I've activated in order to support this particular demo and kind of components. There are two plugins to activate that give us this service portfolio kind of definition, as well as one related to SLA commitments. And really what these do is they provide additional tables, additional fields and views to the attributes that we commonly store about our services, that scope information, the offerings, the commitments that we're making. And then the SLA commitments plugin is actually used to use the SLAs that we would define on an incident or a change or a request and associate them to our service commitments so we can get the tracking of our actual service health and service achievement through the transactions of incident, problem, and change. Another one I just want to highlight really quickly is there is another one that I'll show here in a second. It's called the Task Outage Relationship plugin. What this allows us to do is create an outage record from a task, an incident, a change, a project, and I'll kind of show you where to do this in a second when we go and create an outage record. Before I go there, let's, since we're talking taxonomy, we have a module out here for service taxonomy. So here's where I'm actually going and seeing my different catalogs, right? So I can see IT services as one of our catalogs out here. I can go and add a new top level category if I wanted to, but I'm going to go add just a new one into access and security. So this is where I can define my different services underneath here, or I can say let's define a new category. Maybe I want to call this one cybersecurity, and I'll give it I'll give it a little icon. So it shows up with something a little differently. And again, this data could come from an export from Dawn's XMIME and then import into these tables in terms of the linkages and relationships. So now I've added a taxonomy. If I go back to our service health or service catalog page, under access to security, now I see cybersecurity as one of my selections in my category list. Right. I haven't put any services underneath it, so I've got a blank page at this point, but that's where I've in essence associated a new category that I can start to drop services into. All right, so next, let's go create a new service. So I'll show you some of the service details going on. I'm going to create a service called expense management. I'll go ahead and make myself the owner of this. I'll give it a version, give it an applications group, And then I'll say as far as pricing goes, our pricing unit is, we have a monthly kind of transaction or charge for it. I'm also going to note that our actual software product behind this service is a product called Concur. So some people may know it by this name or this alias. So we're going to kind of allow a little additional meta information about this particular service for those to find it by its kind of product name versus service name. And I've got a couple of things I'm just going to copy and paste in here just to kind of complete this service. I'll give it a unit description, I'll fill in some of my at-a-glance information here, which looks like this. I could also highlight some additional key features, benefits, some contact information. I will give it an image here just so it has, a little bit of color to it. And so I've got my service that's now been created. The one thing I didn't do is I haven't yet stuck it into in our taxonomy tree. I didn't hang it off of those branches, right? And I do that in this classification field. So here's where I would open up our taxonomy, right? I got things like here's our new cybersecurity category I could throw it into, and I can open and expand all our various taxonomy trees and ultimately attach this to one of those branches. I'm going to stick it in business applications and finance. All right, so that defines kind of the service. Obviously, I can define more details about scope and out of scope, but what I want to actually get to is show where I would put the commitments that I make or I'm going to make in regards to this service. And I do that at this service offering level. And one of the things that Don showed was when you got down to the service, you might have Windows or Linux or Oracle for Linux versus Solaris. You may also have gold, platinum, silver kind of offerings. So ultimately, if you have different commitments for your different, for your different user groups, if one of them you have 99% availability and one you have a 95% availability, and those become the criteria under which you should define a different offering. Certainly, and usually your price will differ based off of offering as well. In this particular case, I'm just going to have one offering for expense management. We'll kind of give it a price of $30 per month. And then I'm going to attach this to a few commitments. So I'm going to we'll give ourselves a resolution target commitment. I'll do an availability commitment and a access request commitment of 1 business day. And while it's kind of doing some calculations right now on out of this, I'll highlight that obviously I can pull from this catalog of commitments and have a predefined kind of standard of here's some of the standard commitments that I can attach to all my various services. But it's also worth noting I could add a new commitment that would be unique to our expense management service as well and define, if this is related to service requests or if it's related to uptime, or if it's related to something like, resolution targets or response targets on incidents. And I could also have some that are just more attribute driven to say we're going to provide, 10 gigabytes of memory or something like that as part of our service. All right, so I've almost got my service completely built to my satisfaction. There's one other thing I wanted to do, and that was I know my service is dependent on another service. And how I build that is I build it as a relationship. So I would build it out here and define a depends on relationship. I'm going to say this is dependent on our identity management service. So in essence, access to our expense management service goes through our identity management tool and service activity. So now what I've got a whole bunch of relationships, and let me show you this from a map view. What we'll see now is that we have our expense management service is now dependent on identity management, which is made up of some applications, which is also then housed on a server and dependent on some other services downstream as well. Right, and I can also do kind of a load more here, and maybe I want to change this to just to show you real quickly, identity management also as a core is now supporting our expense management service, but also supports a couple other services as well, our Salesforce and our Workday. So we can kind of get a sense of now we've got a core service that is driving the activities and identity activities for multiple different services out here. All right, so one thing I want to highlight with this too is that we have a kind of a page that we've created out here called this outage dependency definition, and this is really to take those dependencies or those dependent parts, like in this case the relationship between expense management, identity management, and define if we have outages, degradations, or issues with some of our dependent components, what impact do they have on our kind of upstream services. So in some cases we could turn this off entirely and say we don't want any impact from our components up to our service. We can treat incidents as service degradations. We can also drive kind of how far down that map tree do we look for impacts. The other thing we can do on this page is if there are areas where things are kind of clustered together. So for example, this could be two applications that really work together in concert. By grouping them together, what we're stating here in terms of a rules table is that both of these components have to be down or both of them have to be degraded in order for our expense management service to be considered down or degraded as well. There's also an option out here to exclude. So we could exclude certain components from having any impact. And this would, maybe be the case if we had some sort of, utility server or information server that wasn't critical to the health of our overall service. All right. So kind of putting this into action, let me create an outage and show you kind of what happens if I create an outage to one of these components. So I'm going to create an incident record first, and I will attach this to our, so notice this is the server. That's ISXH 433. That is actually on our map down here, way at the bottom, right? So I'm going to say I've got, and then we can create an outage for this particular, I guess I should give it a description first. Server is unresponsive. I can right-click, create an outage. I'm going to give it the same message. And then I'll say begin outage now. Now what happens is now if this incident and this outage, now I created one outage record, but guess what? I've actually now got 8 outage records associated with this incident, because what it's doing is it's looking at this, going upstream to all the impacts, looking at those rules tables and saying, I need to cascade this outage across all our different services and service offerings that are impacted by this particular component. And then these become synchronized. So for example, if I change when this outage actually started, I could say it started at 8 a.m. this morning. And what will happen is all of these outages now get synchronized to match that same outage information. Now let me toggle back to the portal out here. Let me show you kind of some of what the consumer sees when we get these outages. For one, we've got a new multiple service outages reported on this home page. Under my notifications and alert, I'm getting highlighted that I've got a number of different services that are unresponsive. These ones that are in blue actually are for me as a service owner to say, here's a couple services you own that have been reported as down. You might want to come out here and add more information to these particular outages. And so as a service owner, I can come out here. I can go out to my status tab, for example. I see my outage. I can actually augment this outage as well and add some additional information to my consumers, my audience, to say, here's what's actually happening with this particular degradation or outage, and kind of use this as a vehicle to communicate to my consumers. All right, so let's take a quick, since I'm here, let's take a quick glance at, so here's basically that service I defined, right? So we put all our different description information, our at-a-glance information. We've got our offerings and our commitments we see down here. All right, we saw the status tab. I can also start to add feedback now to my new service. I'll just submit one just so you can kind of see that. And that starts now kind of an overall average rating of our service, as well as having some reviews and feedback on it. And then the other thing, since I'm a service owner, I've got an actual, I have I guess a different perspective out in this portal than other consumers do as well. I actually have a dashboard view I can go into to look at my service and use this as my cockpit to kind of manage the activities of my service. So where I'll start on here is there is on the right here, these are my commitments, right? And I can kind of see how am I doing in terms of achieving these in the last 7 days, last 30 days, last 12 days, right? Obviously, my server unresponsive outage is going to impact my my overall availability target if it stays, you know, down for too long. And then I can look at some of the transactions that feed into this kind of health over. I can look at my active incidents, closed incidents. I can look at active requests, closed requests. I can look at my subscribers if I had any. And then I've also got a view out here to look at my health, right? I can kind of see a correlation here between this particular server's outage and health to our identity management service, as well as our overall expense management service. Our reviews and feedback route here, I can also open this up and do a little more collaborative activities in terms of, you know, liking messages, adding comments, and kind of, you know, posting messages or information about our service out here as well as a way to communicate to our service consumers. And the last thing I want to do just to complete my dashboard, we do have an area where you can kind of add your reports out or add reports out here if you want to. So I can add a couple reports to my new service dashboard. I'm going to add just from we have a couple of templates out here. I'll add these from our template. And now I've got a couple reports out here that I can kind of manage to as well. It just has some mocked up data at this point, but ultimately would be, you know, data that would come about our service and our transactions and kind of trends in health of overall things. So that kind of covers the basis of what I wanted to show today. I hope this was helpful, and hope this helps spark some thoughts for all those out there kind of going down the service catalog journey.
Hey, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. I'd like to say the new visual view you have of the upstream and downstream service linkings and the CIs was very cool. I like that. And the other thing that's nice is I call it intelligent dependency, where you're looking at, is the service down or is just the service impaired? And it sort of adds another level of kind of that intelligence to true service health. So you want to take us back to the presentation?
Yep, let me do that.
Thank you. Okay, so if you found this interesting, you wonder what could be possible next steps, here's a couple of options from us. You can sign up on our website, get a login, and you can demo our catalog and portal yourself. Just like what Jeff was going through, you can go through as a user and play with your heart's content. It's very easy to do. If you're interested in perhaps considering a broader service catalog initiative, but you're not sure where to start, we do have a one-day private service catalog workshop we hold on your site for up to 15 attendees. And it's really terrific for educating your team, creating common language and direction. And you can truly save months of effort in consensus building and get your program moving. So we think it's a pretty good value at less than $4,000, including the travel costs. If you're looking for ability to see a little bit more information about our service taxonomy, there is a short demo video of it on our website. You can find it there. And last but not least, here's a webinar special today. If you would like a copy of our Service Taxonomy Definitions and Best Practices Guide, that's what goes with our taxonomy when we deliver it. Just reply via email and we'll be in touch to get it to you. So I think that's all we've got to cover today, and we do have a few minutes for questions if we have any that have come in.
We do. So if you're interested in that offer from Don, when you get my email, and my name's Stephanie Nickel, you'll have the email from me with the slides and the recording. You can just reply to that, or you can send an email to marketing@evergreensys.com, and I'll get that over to you. So as far as the questions, so Don, I'm going to start with the one that I had proposed at the end of your presentation, which is, what's the taxonomy? Services, categories, offerings, requests. Seems like the presenter is using services generically.
Right. So the taxonomy, if you look at the definitions, and it's important because it can get confusing, the taxonomy is always the framework. And the framework can be category, subcategory, down to what we call service family. You don't have to call it that. It's a way of categorizing, but none of those things are services. They're the framework. That's the purple. Then we go to the orange, which is actually a service, and a service is something that's durable and is consumable. right? So in our example, Oracle is a service family because we have a number of different varieties of Oracle, and they're different in how we deliver and support them. So you can't really just order Oracle. You can order Oracle for Windows as a service, right? So that's how we define it. However, you can define Oracle as a service if you wanted the offerings directly there. So you can see how the taxonomy could be dropped down or up based on where you want to draw that line. That's why the definitions are really important. Now, we show it with services and with requests on it because what it does is it gives a materiality reflection. Since that line moves around, you kind of need to see what are the services and the requests hanging off so I can help define where do we go from purple to orange, right? It really does help. And every time we've done taxonomy exercises, if we don't have services and requests, people don't know where things are. And it really helps to ground you, basically.
Okay, great. And actually, I've got a second question from the same person. Are there any industry standard service taxonomies?
Not that there are some that are trying to be developed from there's one group I heard of in Australia, and we used over 30 different models that we were able to accumulate to create ours, right? And but the answer is, not, to my knowledge, there's nothing that's standardized. There is one coming out actually in the education higher ed, but that is designed specifically for their vertical, the higher ed. However, we find that as a rule, the higher ed organizations are pretty advanced in taxonomy thinking.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question, I think this would be for you, Don. How do you translate the values of service taxonomy to tangible or benefits, such as dollar value?
You know, we haven't really built a way to monetize just the set of return. I can say this, that, you know, it's been the kind of thing where the people those who want a taxonomy or need the help are struggling because they're drowning in services, right? And they're lost as to how they manage and organize those services. So service quality and consistency become poor, and if your service capital will die. You will die. The whole thing will drop dead if your service quality is inconsistent or poor. Right? It'd be like going to Amazon and buying a stereo, and that was great, and then you go buy tennis shoes, and that was terrible. And you don't say, well, some of Amazon's good and some's bad. Well, you say Amazon stinks. Right? That's how customers look at it. And actually having a good experience and then a bad one is more damaging than delivering consistently bad experiences. Okay, so the other way to answer the question, it wouldn't be hard to quantify it. We just haven't been required to do it for customers that want to proceed on this, is if we're doing what we call balanced design, that's where we leverage self-service to have the customer get a good experience, but at the same time, by the choices and selections they make, it funnels down IT activity to a smaller set, and it's consistently coming out of the funnel so we can automate those activities. Right? And as an example, we followed that principle to automate software and hardware sales in a software store for a client. And they have 3 people that serve 150,000 customers, 200 software titles, and it's completely unattended unless it breaks. So there's an example of balanced design.
All right, let's see, next question. It looks like this data being shown is manually added into Xmind. Why is this not shown from the ServiceNow platform itself? There is not
Xmind gives us the ability to visualize the taxonomy and work with it as a group, right? It is foundational to being successful in a taxonomy conversation. They're hard enough as it is. But if you can't manipulate it effectively and easily in a group and for everyone to see the way things fit, it's a terrible experience. We did our first taxonomy exercises a couple years ago using spreadsheets, and that was horrible because you couldn't see it and you couldn't maneuver it. So in the platform, you just can't make it work in a way that a group can understand it and come to some consensus around what they're doing and develop that kind of experience and pattern going forward.
Let's see. Is there a limit to the number of levels you can build the service taxonomy?
No, there's no limit to the number of levels, and the key is that the levels should be guided by what the customer would expect to experience. The classification, the depth of classification, and the breadth of classification should be driven by a quality customer experience. If you look at Amazon's taxonomy, they have hundreds of categories. It's a huge taxonomy, and then they have subcategories and subcategories. It's monstrously large. It's many thousands of lines, okay? But they manage the experience effectively in the breadth, right? And of course, people find most of what they want by search, which is what we also expect most people to do, is to use search to find the services, the requests, the offers, the things like that. But if they do go into a taxonomy, it should make sense, right? So there's no, all there is guidance. There's no hard and fast rules. The taxonomy could be 100 layers deep. It wouldn't be very practical in most cases.
Okay, great. Does this taxonomy structure require sorry, I'm having a tough time today. Does this taxonomy structure require category and subcategory under the business service, or can you navigate through business services and CI groups by search?
Yeah, you can navigate anything by search, right? The taxonomy, here's why we use the taxonomy, because you could say, hey, I'm not going to drill down the taxonomy. Some people actually do, right? They would say, oh, there's financial services. Let me see what we offer. So they would actually go into that category and take a look at it. But it's not generally how we find things. The customer's usually going to use search. So what happens? Why do we care about a taxonomy then? And why do we care about the labels? Well, if you look at the labels in the taxonomy, the way search is going to land, if you search on something that's an HR service, you're going to land, if it's properly designed, in an HR-centric kind of experience, right? You're going to go to that landing page or that spot. And on that page, there's going to be things you can do. There's going to be things like that. There's going to be common problems. And guess what? The labels on those things will probably be the labels in your taxonomy, right? Because that's where they're going to come from. You're going to map them in. And so that's why the customer has to recognize those labels. It has to be their language when they get there. Okay, as the provider, it gives you the ability to see your services more easily, and then, you're not lost in them. And you can say, hey, we can reuse this over here. These guys can create a service like this of their own that's useful. Or, we've got redundant services in 2 different areas. Or, the other thing it's great for is it stops people from owning service areas. Now, you think about it, HR doesn't own HR as a service area in the catalog. A lot of the services provided in HR may come from HR, but there could be training services represented there that are coming from IT or coming from security, right? I mean, it's possible, but you might expect, the customer might expect to find them in the HR service catalog, right? So the idea of it being designed for the customer, it also helps for us not to try to own the services in there, because then we create silos, right? We create kingdoms of services. And the truth is, most services require a lot of us to deliver, not any one area, not any one silo.
We are at the end of the hour, but I do have a couple more questions, so I invite you all to stick around for these. Don, do we need a CMDB in order to provide service health?
Do we need a CMDB in order to provide service health?
Yes. That's for you.
You want to take that, Jeff?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, I mean, I'd say from a ServiceNow perspective, some of what I showed today, right, was the relationship between the service and the CMDB components, and that's kind of how I cascaded the outage to our service, was from, a dependent component. But, we don't necessarily need to have those relationships in order to reflect the health of our service. Certainly we could create outage records directly against that same service in the same way that I created an outage to, say, a server that impacts that service, as well as, in other ways of just communicating outages and alerts or notifications via portal or to your consumers. We can provide kind of health information for a variety of different ways. Ideally, having a CMDB and related parts can enable you to have things like event management, create alerts and create incidents and notify you of outages to components and be able to share what the service impact is to those outages and alerts.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. And Jeff, I think this last one's for you as well. Is there a way to only show the catalogs and services that apply to a user?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of what I showed today was the full breadth of here's all the different catalogs we have, here's all the different service categories and services that we have. Ideally, we want to show only ones that are relevant to the users. One perspective I did show was the My Services area, which is, again, for some consumers, that would probably be the view we'd want to have them see, are just the services that they are considered a subscriber to, or that they directly have use of. But I was going to say, from a ServiceNow perspective, we can implement this in a variety of ways, but there is a concept in ServiceNow called user conditions or user criteria that we can assign to the categories or to the items, and that would be what we'd use to drive whether or not a user logged into the portal can see a given category, can see a given catalog, or can see a given service.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. I think that is the end of our questions, and I just want to remind everyone that you will get a recording link and slides from me, and if you're interested in the guide that Don offered, you can reply to my email or email me at marketing@evergreensys.com. So again, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to having you on a future webinar. Bye-bye.